In the shadow of the Treaty of Versailles, a wounded Germany dreamed of resurgence. Humiliated by the scuttling of its high seas fleet at Scapa Flow, the nation yearned to reclaim its naval glory. This desire, fueled by the rising tide of National Socialism, would give birth to a legend, a monster of steel and fire that would terrify the Atlantic. The battleship Bismarck. By the mid-1930s, Germany was openly defying the world. The Anglo-German Naval Agreement of 1935, while seemingly a limitation, was actually a green light for Adolf Hitler's ambitions. It allowed Germany to build a navy up to 35% of the size of the Royal Navy. This was the opening the Kriegsmarine, Germany's navy, had been waiting for. The old pocket battleships were clever, but they weren't true titans. Germany needed a ship that could outfight anything afloat. It needed a symbol. The plan was audacious. A new class of battleships, the Bismarck. At the Blohm & shipyard in Hamburg, a city with a proud maritime history, the keel of Battleship F was laid on July 1st, 1936. Over the next 3 years, an army of workers, engineers, and designers would pour their sweat and genius into its creation. The air buzzed with the clang of hammers, the roar of furnaces, and a palpable sense of national pride. This wasn't just another ship. It was the resurrection of German sea power. Every aspect of the Bismarck was engineered for dominance. Her heart was a set of advanced high-pressure steam turbines, capable of pushing her colossal 50,000-ton frame 2 speeds over 30 knots. This made her faster than any of her British counterparts, a crucial advantage for a commerce raider. Her defenses were legendary. A thick belt of Krupp-cemented armor, over a foot thick in critical areas, was designed to repel the heaviest shells. An innovative turtleback armor deck sloped inwards, intended to deflect plunging fire and protect her vital machinery. German engineers were confident she could absorb incredible punishment and keep fighting. But it was her teeth that inspired the most awe. 8 massive 15-inch SKC. 34 guns were mounted in 4 twin turrets, 2 forward and 2 aft, named Anton Bruno, Caesar, and Dora. These were among the finest naval cannons of their era, capable of hurling a nearly 1,800-pound shell over 22 miles, with terrifying accuracy, supported by a secondary battery of 12 5.9-inch guns and a formidable array of anti-aircraft weapons. The Bismarck was a fortress at sea. On February 14, 1939, the day of her launch, Hamburg was electric. Over 60,000 people crowded the shipyard, waving flags and cheering. Adolf Hitler himself arrived to preside over the ceremony. Standing before the immense gray hull, he delivered a fiery speech, his voice echoing across the water. The ship was christened by Dorothea von Lohenfeld, the granddaughter of the Iron Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, for whom the ship was named. As the champagne bottles shattered against the bow, the giant vessel slid gracefully into the River Elbe. The crowd roared. It was a moment of pure propaganda triumph, a powerful statement to the world. Germany was back. Following the launch, the meticulous work of fitting out began. The superstructure rose deck by deck, the guns were carefully hoisted into place, and miles of wiring and pipes were installed. Hitler, ever the showman, paid a personal visit to the nearly completed warship. Walking her decks, he inspected the massive turrets and spoke with the officers. It was during this tour, surrounded by the gleaming steel and raw power of his new flagship, that he reportedly declared the Bismarck to be unsinkable. It was a boast that would echo through history. For the Kriegsmarine, led by Grand Admiral Erich Raeder, the Bismarck was more than a ship. It was the key to their strategy. Germany could never match the Royal Navy ship for a ship. Instead, they would wage a war on commerce, a guerre de cours. The plan, code-named Operation Rinabung, was for the Bismarck and her escort, the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugene, to break out into the vast expanse of the Atlantic. There, they would be an apex predator, hunting the vital convoys that were Britain's lifeline. The theory was simple but deadly. The Bismarck could outrun any British battleship strong enough to fight her, and outfight any cruiser fast enough to catch her. Her presence alone would force the Royal Navy to scatter its forces across the ocean, disrupting the convoy system and slowly strangling the British war effort. She was a strategic weapon, designed to break the blockade and win the Battle of the Atlantic. Across the North Sea, in the halls of the British Admiralty, the mood was grim. Naval intelligence watched the Bismarck's construction with growing alarm. They knew her specifications, her speed, her firepower. They called her the monster. The launch was not a celebration, but a warning. Prime Minister Winston Churchill was obsessed, frequently asking his staff, "Where is the Bismarck?" Its existence cast a long, dark shadow over British naval planning. Every captain in the home fleet knew that if the Bismarck broke out, it would be their duty to hunt her down, whatever the cost. As 1941 began, the Bismarck was finally ready. Her crew, a mix of seasoned veterans and eager young sailors, drilled relentlessly, learning to master the complex machine they called home. A sense of destiny surrounded the ship. To her crew and to Germany, she was the finest warship ever built, the pride of the Reich, invincible and unstoppable. The stage was set for one of the most dramatic naval confrontations in history. The Atlantic waited, a cold, gray arena, for the clash of titans that was to come. May 1941. The cold, steel-gray waters of the Baltic Sea churned with anticipation. On the morning of the 19th, a signal flag snapped in the wind aboard the German battleship Bismarck. The anchor chains rattled, a deep rumble echoed through the ship, and with a final blast of its horn, the most powerful warship afloat slipped away from its mooring at Gotenna. Operation, or Rhine exercise, had begun. This was more than just a mission. It was a high-stakes gamble for the fate of the Atlantic. Germany was strangling under the British blockade, its war machine hungry for resources. The only way to fight back was to sever Britain's own lifeline, the vital convoys carrying food, fuel, and weapons from North America. If these supply lines could be cut, Britain would be starved into submission. The key to this strategy was the Bismarck. At the helm of this formidable force was Fleet Commander Admiral Gunther Ludgens, a seasoned, cautious veteran of the First World War. Ludgens was the very picture of stoic determination. He was a brilliant strategist, but he was also acutely aware of the immense risks. He knew that the Royal Navy would throw everything it had at him. His orders were clear: avoid direct confrontation with British warships and focus solely on merchant shipping. Commerce raiding was the goal, not a glorious naval battle. Standing beside him on the bridge was Bismarck's commanding officer, Captain Ernst Lindemann. Where Ludgens was reserved and pragmatic, Lindemann was charismatic and immensely proud of his ship and crew. He had overseen Bismarck's construction and trials, and he believed she was invincible. He had complete faith in his men and the state-of-the-art technology at his command. This contrast between the cautious admiral and the confident captain created a palpable tension in the command center. Bismarck was not alone. Sailing in formation with her was the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen, another new and powerful addition to the Kriegsmarine. Commanded by Captain Helmuth Brinkmann, Prinz Eugen was to act as the scout and partner in this deadly duo. Together, they represented the pinnacle of German naval engineering, a swift and lethal raiding force designed to wreak havoc. Their first stop was the Grimstadford in Norway, tucked away under the cover of the rugged coastline. Both ships refueled and prepared for the most dangerous leg of their journey. It was here that a Swedish cruiser on a routine patrol spotted them. Noting their dazzle camouflage designed to confuse enemy, a Norwegian resistance agent also managed to photograph them from the shore. The secret was already starting to unravel. News of their presence was relayed to the British Admiralty in London. The hunt was on the evening of May 21st, under the cloak of a stormy sky. Bismarck and Prinz Eugen weighed anchor and pointed their bows north, towards the Arctic Circle. Their plan was to break out into the vast expanse of the North Atlantic through the treacherous Denmark Strait, the icy channel separating Greenland and Iceland. It was a daunting passage, notorious for its fog, icebergs, and savage weather. But Ludgens hoped this harsh environment would provide the cover they needed to slip past the Royal Navy's patrols. Aboard the Bismarck, the mood was a complex mix of emotions. For the 2,200 young sailors and officers, many on their first combat mission, there was an overwhelming sense of confidence. They were serving on the greatest warship in the world. They had trained relentlessly, and they trusted their commanders and their vessel implicitly. The ship's band played on deck as they left Norway, a surge of patriotic pride swelling through the crew. They were on an epic adventure, about to make history, but among the senior officers, a quiet tension simmered. They understood the gravity of their situation. The North Atlantic was not an empty ocean. It was the Royal Navy's backyard. It was patrolled by dozens of cruisers, destroyers, and, most importantly, the capital ships of the British Home Fleet. The British had also cracked many of the German naval codes, giving them an almost unseen advantage. Every radio transmission, every change of course, carried the risk of discovery. As they steamed north, the weather worsened. A cold, biting wind whipped across the decks, and a thick, disorienting fog enveloped the ships. The temperature plummeted. Lookouts, wrapped in heavy coats, strained their eyes, peering into the gray void for any sign of the EMEA silhouette on the horizon, the wake of a periscope, the drone of an aircraft engine. The state-of-the-art radar on both ships swept the seas constantly, its electronic pulses the only eyes that could pierce the gloom. Lugans knew that Admiral Sir John Tovey, commander of the British Home Fleet, would be marshalling his forces at Scapa Flow. The cruisers Suffolk and Norfolk were already patrolling the Denmark Strait, equipped with new radar that could detect them from miles away. The formidable battlecruiser, Hood, the pride of the Royal Navy, and the brand-new battleship, Prince of Wales, were steaming at full speed to intercept. Far to the south, the aircraft carrier Ark Royal and the mighty Force H were ready to be unleashed from Gibraltar. The entire North Atlantic was becoming a giant chessboard, and Bismarck was the prize. On May 22nd, Lutjens made a fateful decision. Believing they had not yet been definitively identified, he broke radio silence to report his position and intentions to Naval Command in Germany. It was a calculated risk, but one that provided the British with another crucial piece of the puzzle. Their radio direction finders locked onto the transmission, confirming the raiders' general location and heading. The crew of the Bismarck remained largely unaware of the tightening net. Their daily routine continued with disciplined precision. Drills were run, watches were changed, and the ship's massive engines thrummed with a constant, reassuring power. Down in the engine rooms, men worked in the stifling heat, tending to the boilers that propelled their 50,000-ton steel fortress through the waves. In the galleys, cooks prepared meals, maintaining a sense of normalcy amidst the ever-present danger. But the feeling that they were ghosts, slipping unseen through enemy waters, was beginning to fade. They were a predator, but they were also the prey. The stakes could not have been higher. For Germany, a successful mission could change the course of the war. For Britain, failure to stop Bismarck would be a catastrophic blow to its survival and morale. Every man aboard Bismarck, from Admiral Lutjens on the bridge to the youngest sailor swabbing the decks, knew they were heading into the heart of the storm. The icy waters of the Denmark Strait lay just ahead, and with it, a confrontation that would echo through history. The first test was about to begin. The world's most powerful battleship was on the verge of its first, and what would be its last, battle. May 21st, 1941. Above the fjords of Norway, the lone engine of a British Spitfire reconnaissance plane hums a steady, anxious tune. The pilot, Flying Officer Michael Suckling, is on a routine patrol, his eyes scanning the gray choppy waters below. Suddenly, he spots them. Nestled in Grimstad Ford near Bergen are two German warships. One is the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen. The other is a behemoth, a monster of steel and firepower that was supposed to be a ghost, a myth. It's the Bismarck. The shutter of his camera clicks, capturing the grainy, yet undeniable proof. This single photograph will set in motion a chain of events that will culminate in one of the most famous and tragic naval battles in history. By London, the Admiralty is in an uproar. The Bismarck, Germany's new super battleship and the most powerful warship afloat, has broken out. Its mission is clear: to slip into the vast expanse of the Atlantic and wreak havoc on the vital convoy routes that are Britain's lifeline. If it succeeds, the war could be lost. The Royal Navy, the most powerful navy in the world, cannot allow that to happen. The order is given. The Hunt, Ison, from the naval base at Scapa Flow in Scotland, the pride of the Royal Navy steams out to meet the threat. Leading the charge is the battlecruiser HMS Hood. For 20 years, She has been the symbol of British sea power. She is the mighty Hood, a celebrated icon known across the globe. Fast, elegant, and armed with massive 15-inch guns, her very presence is a statement of dominance. The sailors on her decks feel it. They are serving on the greatest warship ever built, and they are confident, almost arrogant. They are sailing to intercept a German upstart, to teach it a lesson about who truly rules the waves. Accompanying the Hood is the brand new battleship, HMS Prince of Wales. So new, in fact, that she's not entirely finished. Civilian contractors are still on board, working on her complex gun turrets. She hasn't even completed her sea trials. But there's no time. The Bismarck must be stopped, and Prince of Wales, with her modern design and powerful 14-inch guns, is one of the few ships that stands a chance. The two British giants plow through the heavy North Atlantic swells, their bows cutting through the cold, gray water. Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland, commanding the squadron from the bridge of the Hood, knows the stakes. His mission is simple: find and destroy. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Admiral Gunther Lutyens stands on the bridge of the Bismarck. He knows the British are coming. His ships are pushing through the same icy sea, heading for the Denmark Strait, the treacherous passage between Iceland and Greenland. This is their gateway to the open Atlantic. The fog is thick, a swirling, damp shroud that reduces visibility to mere miles. It's both a blessing and a curse. It distim, but it also hides the enemy. On both the British and German ships, the atmosphere is electric with anticipation. Sailors go through their drills, checking ammunition hoists, training the massive gun turrets, and scanning the horizon. The constant ping of sonar echoes through the holes, a relentless search for the enemy lurking in the murky depths or the dense fog. Lookouts, bundled against the biting wind, strain their eyes, knowing that they will be the first to spot the telltale silhouette of a warship on the horizon. For 2 days, the fleets hunt each other in a tense game of cat and mouse across 1,000 miles of ocean. The weather is brutal. Freezing spray coats the decks in ice. The men are exhausted, running on adrenaline and lukewarm coffee. They know a confrontation is inevitable. The question is when and where. The British sailors on the Hood share stories of her glory days, her world cruises, the awe she inspired in every port she visited. She is more than a ship. She is a legend. There is a sense that this will be just another chapter in her glorious history. The Bismarck is a formidable opponent. Yes, but this is the mighty Hood. Victory is expected. On the Bismarck, the mood is different. It's a mixture of pride in their state-of-the-art vessel and a grim understanding of their situation. They are the hunters, but they are also the hunted. They are deep in enemy territory, with the entire Royal Navy bearing down on them. Their faith is in their ship's superior engineering, its thick armor, and the devastating accuracy of its guns. As the evening of May 23rd descends, the British cruiser HMS Suffolk, equipped with new radar, makes contact. A ghost in the fog, a blip on a screen. Enemy contact. The words crackle over the radio. Bismarck and Prince Eugene have been found in the Denmark Strait. Admiral Holland on the Hood receives the report. He orders his ships to increase speed, pushing them to their limits. The engines of the Hood and Prince of Wales roar to life, thundering with a new urgency. They are closing the distance. Throughout the night, the British cruisers Suffolk and Norfolk shadow the German squadron, darting in and out of fog banks, reporting their position, all while dodging salvos from Bismarck's massive guns. The first shots of the engagement have been fired. On the Hood, the call to action stations. Blair. Men scrambled to their posts. In the deep belly of the ship, sailors in the shell rooms and magazines begin the Herculean task of feeding the guns. On the bridge officers plot the final intercept course. The confidence from before is still there, but now it's sharpened with a razor's edge of tension. As the first light of dawn breaks on May 24th, the moment arrives. Through a break in the mist, the lookouts on the Hood finally see them. Two shapes on the horizon, dark against the pale morning sky. The German fleet. At the same instant, lookouts on the Bismarck spot the British ships. The long-range optical sights on the German battleship are legendary, and they lock onto the lead British ship. For a moment, There is confusion. Is the lead ship the Prince of Wales or the Hood? They have similar profiles. Aboard the Hood, Admiral Holland makes a critical decision. He must close the range quickly. He knows the Hood's weakness. Her thin deck armor, a relic of an older era of naval design. At long-range, plunging shells could penetrate her decks and detonate in her magazines with catastrophic results. He orders a turn towards the enemy, an aggressive, head-on charge. The range is closing. 25,000 yards. The sea between the two naval titans is shrinking with every second. On foreseeps the pride of two nations. Thousands of men hold their breath. The guns are trained. The rangefinders are locked. The air itself seems to crackle with unspoken energy. This is it. The culmination of the chase. The prelude to the duel. The giants of the sea are about to speak, and their language is fire and steel. The Battle of the Denmark Strait is about to begin. May 24th, 1941. The cold, gray waters of the Denmark Strait are about to become the stage for one of naval history's most dramatic and tragic duels. On one side, the pride of the Royal Navy. The battlecruiser HMS Hood. She's a symbol of British sea power, a beloved giant that has patrolled the Empire's sea lanes for 2 decades. On the other, the brand new German battleship, Bismarck, the most powerful warship afloat, a terrifying testament to German engineering and ambition. This isn't just a battle, it's a clash of titans, a collision of ideologies played out in steel and fire. The British squadron, led by Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland aboard Hood, also includes the new battleship, Prince of Wales. Their mission is simple but daunting. Find and destroy the Bismarck before it can break out into the Atlantic and wreak havoc on the vital convoys that are Britain's lifeline. They've been hunting for days, enduring the biting North Atlantic wind and the constant tension of the chase. Finally, just before dawn, the silhouettes are spotted. The enemy is in their sights. The range is extreme, over 13 miles. But the moment has come. Aboard the Hood, the command rings out. Open fire. The forward turrets, each housing 2 massive 15-inch guns, roar to life. A blinding flash, a deafening thunderclap, and 4 half-ton shells arc across the sky towards the distant German ships. Seconds later, the Prince of Wales joins the chorus, its own guns adding to the terrifying symphony of naval warfare. The opening shots are fired. The battle for the Atlantic has begun in earnest. The German ships, Bismarck and its heavy cruiser escort, Prinz Eugen, waste no time in replying. Their own formidable guns belch fire, and soon the air is filled with the shrieks of incoming shells. For the men on the British ships, the experience is surreal. One moment, there's the violent, gut-punching shock of their own guns firing. The next, an eerie silence, broken only by the hum of machinery and the rush of wind. Then, the warning comes from the lookouts. Incoming, colossal pillars of water erupt from the sea around them, towering hundreds of feet into the air, drenching the decks in icy spray. These are the shell splashes, the near misses. Each one is a stark reminder that a slight adjustment, a few yards in either direction, means the difference between a close call and utter annihilation. The German gunnery is terrifyingly accurate. From the very first salvos, they have the range. Shells straddle the Hood, boxing Aryan. Aboard the Bismarck, gunnery officer Odelbert Schneider is calmly calling out corrections, his crew working with ruthless efficiency. They're focused on the lead British ship, the Hood. An 8-inch shell from the Prinz Eugen strikes Hood, starting a large fire amidst the ready-use ammunition for anti-aircraft guns. Flames and thick, black smoke billow into the sky, making the mighty battlecruiser an even clearer target against the dawn light. Despite the fire, the Hood fights on, a wounded but still defiant giant. Admiral Holland knows he's at a disadvantage. Hood's deck armor is notoriously thin, a fatal flaw for a battlecruiser designed before the age of long-range plunging fire. His best chance is to close the distance as quickly as possible, to get into a range where the shells will come in at a flatter trajectory and strike the thick side armor. He orders a turn, bringing all of his ship's guns to bear on the enemy. It is a race against time, a desperate gamble against the precision of the German gunners. On the bridge of the Bismarck, there's a sense of professional calm, but also awe at the spectacle. They watch as their shells land around the legendary British ship. Then, at 6:01 a.m., just 8 minutes after the first shot was fired, Bismarck fires its fifth salvo. The shells travel for nearly a minute, silent projectiles soaring through the upper atmosphere before plunging back towards the sea. One of those shells, a 1-ton, armor-piercing projectile, embarks on a journey of pure, devastating luck. It strikes the hood somewhere between the mainmast and the rear turret. It punches through the thin deck armor as if it were paper, slicing down through multiple decks, its fuse delaying the explosion for a fatal fraction of a second. Deep within the ship, it finds what it's looking for: the main ammunition magazine for the aft 15-inch guns. Inside, over 100 tons of cordite propellant are stored. The shell detonates. The result is instantaneous and apocalyptic. A colossal pillar of fire, a blinding white-hot flash, erupts from the center of the HMS Hood. It shoots 1,000 feet into the sky, a horrifying mushroom cloud of flame, smoke, and debris. The ship, the largest warship in the world, is lifted from the water, its back broken. The shockwave is immense, felt miles away on the other ships. The Prince of Wales is showered with metal fragments, some as large as a dinner table. For the men aboard the Prince of Wales, watching just a few hundred yards away, it is a moment of pure, undiluted horror. 1 second, their flagship is there, blazing away at the enemy. The next, it's gone, replaced by a funeral pyre. The mighty Hood splits in two. The bow section rises vertically, its forward turrets pointing at the sky in a final, salute. The stern section vanishes almost immediately. Within 3 minutes of the hit, the entire ship is gone, dragged beneath the waves of the Denmark Strait. Of a crew of 1,418 men, only 3 survive. 1,415 sailors, officers, and boys are gone in the blink of an eye. The news travels back to London with the speed of electricity, but its impact lands with the force of a physical blow. In the Admiralty's war room, the heart of the Royal Navy's global operations, the message arrives. Officers who have weathered years of war, who have sent men into battle and received news of losses before, are frozen in disbelief. The Hood sunk. It seems impossible. Not the Hood. She was more than a ship. She was an institution, a symbol of permanence and power. The room falls into a stunned, horrified silence. The mood shifts from shock to a cold, hard rage. The news reaches the Prime Minister, Winston Churchill. He is in the middle of a weekend at Chequers, his country residence. Upon hearing that the Hood has been blown up, his legendary iron composure is shattered, ace and rog. The loss is a personal blow, a national humiliation. To Bismarck, a single German ship has single-handedly inflicted the Royal Navy's most catastrophic loss of the war. Churchill's response is immediate and absolute. He picks up the phone to the First Sea Lord. His orders are chillingly simple. Sink the Bismarck. There is no room for negotiation, no possibility of failure. Every available ship, every available plane in the Royal Navy's arsenal is to be thrown into the hunt. The Bismarck must not escape. Across Britain, as the news spreads, a wave of grief and shock washes over the nation. For 20 years, the Hood had been the mighty Hood. Schoolchildren had toured her decks. Her image was on postcards and in news. She was a tangible link to Britain's naval glory. Her loss feels like a death in the family. For the Royal Navy, it's a wound to its very soul. The pride has been shattered. But in the depths of that shock and grief, a new, steely resolve is forged. The loss of the Hood is not just a tragedy. It is a call to arms. The hunt for the Bismarck is no longer just a strategic necessity. It is now a mission of vengeance. The entire Royal Navy, from the admirals in London to the sailors on the freezing Atlantic, is united by a single, burning purpose. The Bismarck must be destroyed, whatever the cost. The ghost of the Hood demands it. The morning of May 24, 1941, was a dark one for the British Admiralty. The unthinkable had happened. HMS Hood, the pride of the Royal Navy, the symbol of British sea power for over 2 decades, was gone. In a single, cataclysmic explosion, she had vanished beneath the frigid waves of the Denmark Strait, taking all but 3 of her 1,400 men with her. The news struck London like a physical blow. The Hood wasn't just a ship. She was an institution, a national icon. Her loss was a profound shock, a deep, personal wound to the British psyche. At the Admiralty, the initial reports were met with disbelief, followed by a grim, chilling silence. Vice Admiral Tom Phillips, the Vice Chief of the Naval Staff, stood stone-faced as the dispatches came in. The Hood, gone in minutes. The Prince of Wales, a brand-new battleship on her maiden voyage, damaged and forced to retreat. The culprit, Germany's new Leviathan, the Bismarck, now loose in the vast expanse of the Atlantic. The mood in the war room, a place accustomed to the grim calculus of war, turned from shock to a cold, simmering rage. The loss of the Hood was more than a tactical defeat. It was an unbearable humiliation. The news traveled quickly to 10 Downing Street. Prime Minister Winston Churchill, a man who lived and breathed naval warfare, was in. He had served as First Lord of the Admiralty in 2 world wars. The Royal Navy was his domain, its honor his own. The sinking of the Hood was a direct challenge to everything he and Britain stood for. He immediately got on the line to the First Sea Lord, Admiral Dudley Pound. There was no room for discussion, no space for nuance. Churchill's voice, crackling with fury and resolve, delivered one of the most famous and ruthless naval orders in history. His words were simple, direct, and absolute. I don't care how you do it. You must sink the Bismarck. That order was more than a command. It was a blood oath. Sink the Bismarck. Not capture, not disable, not drive back to port. Sink her. The message electrified the Admiralty. The grief for the Hood was channeled into a singular, burning purpose. Vengeance. The war room, a subterranean labyrinth beneath London, exploded into frantic, coordinated activity. Charts were unfurled, plots were drawn, and signals began flashing to every corner of the Atlantic. The hunt was on. This wasn't just a naval operation anymore. It was a personal vendetta. The order went out, all available ships to the pursuit. It was a staggering commitment. From the frigid waters near Iceland to the balmy approaches of Gibraltar, the Royal Navy began to move. Force H, a powerful squadron based in Gibraltar and commanded by Admiral James Somerville, was ordered to sail north at once. At its heart was the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal, a vessel that had already earned a legendary reputation. Aboard her, pilots and crews began preparing their aging but deadly Swordfish torpedo bombers. They knew their target. From Halifax, Nova Scotia, the battleship HMS Rodney, a slow but brutally powerful vessel armed with massive 16-inch guns, was detached from her convoy escort duties. She and her escorts turned east, plotting a course to intercept. Another battleship, HMS Ark, also broke off from her convoy and steamed towards the hunt. Even troop transports carrying vital reinforcements to the Middle East were left with reduced protection. Churchill had made it clear, nothing was more important than finding and destroying the Bismarck. The Atlantic was about to become the stage for the greatest naval chase in history. The sheer scale of the operation was unprecedented. Dozens of cruisers and destroyers, from every available task force, were redirected. Their orders were to form a vast, sweeping net, a web of steel intended to trap the German raider. Fuel was a critical concern. Ships were pushed to their limits, their engines straining, their fuel gauges dropping precariously. Destroyers, with their shorter range, would have to refuel at sea or break off. But for now, every captain drove his ship with a relentless urgency. This sense of vengeful determination wasn't confined to the Admiralty or the flag officers. It spread like wildfire through the fleet. On the freezing decks of the cruisers Norfolk and Suffolk, which were still shadowing Bismarck from a distance, sailors who had witnessed the Hood's demise firsthand stared at the grey horizon with grim resolve. On the Prince of Wales, her crew worked furiously to repair the damage from their encounter. their desire for a rematch palpable. Aboard every British ship that received the news, from the engine rooms to the bridges, the mood was the same. The men of the Hood were their brothers. They had trained with them, shared ports with them, and knew the families they had left behind. The phrase for the Hood became an unspoken motto. Every sailor, from the youngest rating to the most seasoned captain, understood the stakes. This was about restoring the honor of the Royal Navy and avenging their fallen comrades. Back in Britain, news of the Hood's sinking was released to the public. The nation, already hardened by the Blitz, was plunged into a state of collective mourning and fury. The Hood was a ship that millions of ordinary Britons had visited during peacetime, a floating symbol of their island's strength. Her loss felt personal. In pubs, factories, and homes across the country, the name Bismarck was spoken with a mixture of fear and hatred. The public thirsted for retribution, and they looked to Churchill and the Royal Navy to deliver it. The pressure on Admiral John Tovey, the commander-in-chief of the home fleet aboard his flagship King George V, was immense. He was now the man tasked with carrying out Churchill's order. He was already in hot pursuit, leading a powerful squadron that included the Prince of Wales and the aircraft carrier Victorious. Tovey was a quiet, methodical man, not prone to rash decisions. But he too felt the weight of the moment. He knew the Bismarck was faster than his own battleships and that his only chance was to slow her down. That task would fall to the fragile, fabric-covered Swordfish torpedo planes of the Victorious. As the evening of May 24th approached, the crews of Victorious's 825 Naval Air Squadron prepared for a desperate mission. In the howling winds and rough seas of the North Atlantic, they would have to take off from a pitching flight deck, fly hundreds of miles in failing light, find a single ship in a vast ocean, and press home an attack against a vessel bristling with anti-aircraft guns. The odds were suicidal, yet not a single man hesitated. They were flying for the 1,400 men lost on the Hood. The hunt for the Bismarck had become a national obsession, a saga of revenge that gripped the world. Churchill's order, sink the Bismarck, had set in motion a chain of events that would culminate in one of the most dramatic naval battles of the Second World War. The Royal Navy, wounded but resolute, was gathering its strength from all corners of the ocean for one single purpose: to find the German giant and send it to the bottom. The fate of the Bismarck was sealed, not by tactics or strategy alone, but by the unyielding, vengeful will of an entire nation. The chase continued. May 24th, 1941. The largest naval hunt in history is about to begin. The German battleship Bismarck, a steel monster of terrifying power, has just sunk the pride of the Royal Navy HMS Hood. Now, she's loose in the vast, gray expanse of the North Atlantic, making a desperate run for the safety of occupied France. For the British Admiralty, this isn't just a battle, it's a matter of national survival. If Bismarck reaches port, she could sever Britain's lifeline to America, starving the island nation into submission. The order is simple: find and sink the Bismarck at any cost. Immediately, a sprawling net begins to close. From every corner of the Atlantic, British naval assets are diverted. The battleship HMS Prince of Wales, battered from its first encounter, shadows the German giant. The heavy cruisers Suffolk and Norfolk, the first to make contact, play a deadly game of cat and mouse, darting in and out of the fog banks. Their radar screens a fragile link to their quarry. They are the hounds, snapping at the heels of a wounded, but still lethal, beast. The nerve center of this colossal operation is the Admiralty in London. Men pore over charts, pushing miniature ships across a massive map of the Atlantic. Every signal, every report, is a jolt of adrenaline. The Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, is personally invested, demanding constant updates. The pressure is immense. From the aircraft carrier HMS Victorious, a handful of obsolete Swordfish biplanes, their crews called Amar, launched into the teeth of a growing storm. These fabricant-wire aircraft are all they have within range. Their torpedo attack, pressed home with incredible bravery, scores a single hit. It's a glancing blow, striking Bismarck's heavy armor belt and doing little damage, but it's a psychological victory. It proves Bismarck is not invincible. But then, disaster strikes for the British. In the pre-dawn darkness of May 25th, Bismarck executes a masterful maneuver. Under the cover of a squall, she performs a wide, looping turn, vanishing from the Suffolk's radar. For hours, the British hunt in the wrong direction, convinced she's breaking back out into the open Atlantic. The hunter has lost the scent. A chilling silence descends upon the Admiralty's war room. The most powerful battleship in the world is once again a ghost. The tension becomes almost unbearable. British ships, pushed to their limits, are running dangerously low on fuel. Admiral John Tovey, commanding the home fleet from his flagship HMS King George V, faces an agonizing choice. He must either turn back to refuel, letting Bismarck escape, or gamble everything on one last push. He gambles. He orders his ships to press on, knowing that if they don't find Bismarck soon, they won't have enough fuel to even make it home. The hunt has become a race against time, a race against the fuel gauges. The vastness of the ocean becomes an enemy in itself. The gray waves and low-hanging clouds seem to conspire to hide the German raider. Desperate calls go out across all channels. Even civilian fishing trawlers and merchant vessels are tasked with keeping a lookout, their crews scanning the horizon for the telltale signs. Reports trickle in, many of them false alarms, sending cruisers on frantic, fruitless chase. The scope of the search is staggering hundreds of thousands of square miles of unforgiving sea. Every hour that passes, Bismarck steams closer to the protective umbrella of German air cover from bases in France. The breakthrough comes from an unlikely source. A PBY Catalina flying boat, an American-built aircraft on loan to RAF Coastal Command. Piloted by a mixed British and American crew, it's scouring the endless waves on the very edge of its operational range. And then, through a break in the clouds, they see it. Co-pilot Leonard Tooksmith radios back the electrifying, now legendary message. I've sighted a battleship bearing 240 degrees. Distance 5 miles. Course 150 degrees. But in the excitement, and under fire from Bismarck's anti-aircraft guns, he misidentifies it as heading towards the open Atlantic. A brief moment of confusion follows, but the position report is corrected. The ghost has materialized. Bismarck is found. She's less than 700 miles from the French coast, less than a day and a half from safety. Now the final, most desperate phase of the chase begins. The only force close enough to intercept Bismarck before she reaches air cover is Force H, sailing up from Gibraltar. Its core is the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal. But time is running out. The weather is deteriorating into a full-blown gale, with mountainous seas and shrieking winds that threaten to tear the Swordfish biplanes apart on the flight deck. Launching an airstrike seems impossible. Yet, there is no other choice. In a scene of controlled chaos and sheer determination, the flight crews of Ark Royal managed to get their Swordfish into the air. In a heart-stopping moment of near calamity, their first wave of torpedoes mistakenly targets their own cruiser, HMS Sheffield, which had been sent ahead to shadow Bismarck. Luckily, faulty magnetic detonators on the torpedoes cause them to explode harmlessly on hitting the water. It's a terrifying dress rehearsal. With darkness falling and the storm at its zenith, they try again. This is it. The last chance. The Swordfish crews fly into a wall of flak and tracer fire. The sky lit up by the fury of Bismarck's defenses. They press their attack with suicidal courage, dropping their torpedoes into the churning sea. Most miss or are defeated by the storm. But to find their mark, the first hits amidships, causing minor flooding. The second, however, is the $1,000,002 one-shot. It strikes Bismarck's stern, not on her armored belt, but on her unprotected rudder assembly. The explosion is catastrophic. It doesn't just damage the rudders, it jams them hard to port. The mighty Bismarck, the pinnacle of German naval engineering, is now trapped in a perpetual circle, unable to steer, a lame duck at the mercy of the storm and her pursuers. Her captain sends a final, grim message to Berlin, "Ship unmanövrable." We will fight to the last shell. Long live the 4 of the 3-day, 2,000-mile chase is over. The claustrophobic tension of the hunt gives way to the grim certainty of the final battle. As the British battleships King George V and Rodney close in through the morning gloom, there is no longer any question of escape. The largest naval hunt in history has reached its brutal, inevitable conclusion. Bismarck's fate is sealed. but the story of how she was brought to bay would become a legend of naval warfare, a testament to persistence, luck, and incredible bravery on both sides. May 26, 1941. The North Atlantic is a cauldron of fury. Gale force winds whip the sea into mountainous waves, and a storm ceiling hangs low and menacing. In Tees Charles, a lone leviathan, the German battleship Bismarck steams for the safety of occupied France. For days, she has been the Royal Navy's obsession, a ghost on the waves, having sunk the mighty HMS Hood and vanished into the vastness of the ocean. But now, she's been found, and the British are throwing everything they have at her. Aboard the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal, the situation is desperate. The flight deck pitches and rolls violently. Men cling to lifelines, drenched by freezing spray. Their last, best hope is a squadron of ferry Swordfish torpedo bombers. Looking at these planes, you'd think you were looking at a relic from a bygone era. They're biplanes, covered in fabric, with open cockpits. Their crews call them string bags, and against the sleek, modern terror that is the Bismarck, they seem like a joke. They are slow, fragile, and utterly obsolete. But inside these string bags are men of incredible courage, pilots and observers, huddled against the biting wind, preparing to fly into the teeth of a storm and a wall of anti-aircraft fire. Their mission is a suicide run, a final, desperate gamble. The weather is so bad that an earlier strike from another carrier, HMS Victorious, had only managed a single non-critical hit. Now, it's Ark Royal's turn. The first wave of Swordfish takes off, a harrowing ordeal in itself. The planes struggle to gain altitude, their fabric wings flexing and groaning under the strain of the storm. They are tossed about like leaves in the wind. Navigation is a nightmare. In the swirling mist and rain, they almost attack one of their own ships, the cruiser. HMS Sheffield. Before realizing their mistake, they have to circle back, regroup, and find their true target. Time is running out. Bismarck is getting closer and closer to the protective umbrella of German air cover. Finally, through a break in the clouds, they see it. A dark, malevolent shape plowing through the white-capped waves. Bismarck. Immediately, the sky around the battleship erupts in a storm of fire. Tracers of every color crisscross the gray sky. Puffs of black smoke from flak bursts blossom around the slow-moving biplanes. The German gunners, confident in their advanced fire control systems, throw up a seemingly impenetrable barrier of steel. For the Swordfish pilots, it's a flight through hell. They descend, flying low, skimming the tops of the massive waves. The spray from the ocean lashes at their faces, mixing with the rain. They can see the individual muzzle flashes from Bismarck's guns. The noise is deafening the roar of their own engines, the scream of the wind, and the constant, percussive thunder of the explosions around them. It's a miracle any of them are surviving, they press. On each pilot lines up as shot, a terrifyingly delicate ballet in the midst of pure chaos. They need to get close, dangerously close, to have any chance of their torpedoes hitting. They release their payload, the tin fish dropping into the churning sea, and beginning their run. Most of the torpedoes miss, or they hit the Bismarck's thick armored belt and explode harmlessly. The attack seems to be a failure. The pilots, having dropped their torpedoes, bank away, weaving through the flak, their hearts sinking. They've given it their all, and it wasn't enough. But then, something happens. One torpedo, launched by a Swordfish, piloted by a sub-lieutenant, John Moffat, runs true. It's not aimed at the hull, but at the stern. On board the Bismarck, the crew feels a jarring shudder, different from the other impacts. It's not a massive explosion, but a violent, wrenching impact right at the back of the ship. On to Brit, the helmsman shouts that he's lost control. The wheel spins freely. He can't steer. Panic and confusion ripple through the command structure. Admiral Gunther Lütjens and Captain Ernest Lindemann receive the damage reports. The news is catastrophic. The single British torpedo hasn't sunk them. It has done something far worse. By a 1 in a million stroke of luck, the explosion has struck the Bismarck's Achilles heel. The blast has jammed them hard to port, at a 12-degree angle. The ship is now locked in a perpetual, uncontrollable turn. She is no longer steaming towards France. She is turning in a wide circle, heading directly back towards her hunters. Engineers and damage control teams scramble to the stern, a scene of twisted metal and flooding compartments. They try everything. They attempt to steer with the propellers, a desperate tactic of varying the engine speeds. It doesn't work. The ship is too big, the sea too rough. They send down divers in the flooded compartments to try and unjam the rudders with explosives. It's a suicidal task, and it fails. The rudders are hopelessly mangled. Aboard the bridge, the grim reality sinks in. The Bismarck, the pride of the German Navy, the most powerful battleship afloat, has been crippled, not by a mighty naval gun, not by a modern bomber, but by an antiquated fabric-covered biplane flying in a hurricane. A sense of disbelief and doom settles over the crew. They are now a sitting duck. They can't run. They can't maneuver. They can only turn in circles as the full might of the British home fleet, led by the battleships King George V and Rodney, closes in for the kill. Admiral Lutyens sends a final, heartbreaking message to Berling ship unmaneuverable. We will fight to the last shell. Long live the Fuhrer for the 2,200 men aboard the Bismarck. The long night begins. They know what the morning will bring. The storm that had been their enemy now becomes their only fleeting shield. But it won't last. The torpedo from that one little Swordfish, a piece of obsolete technology wielded by an incredibly brave pilot, had not just damaged a ship, it had sealed the fate of the Bismarck and changed the course of the war at sea. The hunters were about to become the executioners. The North Atlantic, the night of May 26, 1941. Darkness falls not as a comforting blanket, but as a cold, wet shroud. On the bridge of the German battleship Bismarck, the mood is grim. The pride of the Kriegsmarine, the mightiest warship afloat, is no longer a hunter. She is a single torpedo from a Swordfish biplane, a relic from another era, has struck her Achilles heel. Her rudders are jammed, forcing her into a relentless, agonizing circle towards her pursuers. She is a wounded giant, bleeding and trapped. The sea, churned by a ferocious gale, is a maelstrom of towering waves and freezing spray. Every crash of water against the battered hull sounds like a death knell. For the exhausted German sailors, this is a night of relentless torment. Sleep is impossible. The ship lurches and groans, a symphony of tortured metal below decks. In the dim, red glow of emergency lighting, men work with a quiet, desperate resolve. They are tired, soaked, and bone-weary, but their discipline holds. In the engine rooms, engineers fight a losing battle against the jammed steering gear, their faces streaked with grease and sweat. In the sick bay, medics tend to the wounded from earlier attacks, their supplies dwindling. On deck, gun crews huddle behind their steel shields, peering into the inky blackness, their knuckles white as they grip the cold metal. They know what's coming. The radio chatter is a mix of coded messages and grim reports. Hope, once a burning flame, has dwindled to a faint, flickering ember. Out in that same chaotic darkness, another drama unfolds. A wolf pack, not of U-boats, but of British destroyers, closes in, led by the audacious Captain Philip Vian. Destroyers like HMS Cossack, Sikh Zulu, and the Polish Pyroon dart and weave through the mountainous seas. They are David to Bismarck's Goliath, and they are relentless. They can't sink her with their guns, but they can bleed her, harass her, and deny her crew a moment's rest. Suddenly, the night is torn apart. A brilliant, blinding white light hangs in the sky. Star shells. They illuminate the Bismarck in a ghostly, spectral glow, revealing her helpless circling for all to see. The German gunners, momentarily blinded, respond with fury. The massive 15-inch guns roar, sending colossal geysers of water erupting near the destroyers, who are so close they're almost under the minimum range of Bismarck's main armament. Then come the torpedoes. Streaks of white foam cut through the black water. The men on Bismarck's deck hold their breath. Explosions are heard, but they are the premature detonations of torpedoes battered by the violent waves. The destroyers press their attacks, again and again, like persistent hornets stinging a bull. They score no fatal hits, but each attack is a fresh jolt to the nerves of the German crew. Another reminder that there is no escape. The Pyroon, with defiant Polish spirit, even signals to the Bismarck, "I am a Pole," before opening fire. It's an act of pure, audacious courage. Throughout this harrowing night, the German sailors prepare for the end. They write final letters home, stuffing them into pockets, hoping for a miracle that will see them delivered. They share cigarettes and stories, finding small comfort in camaraderie. There is no panic, only a stoic, grim acceptance of their fate. They are sailors, and they will fight their ship to the last. They know that with the dawn will come the full might of the Royal Navy. And out there, beyond the immediate circle of destroyers, the giants are coming. From the south, the battleships, HMS King George V and HMS Rodney steam at their maximum speed, their bows plunging through the heavy seas. Rodney, a veteran of another war, carries the massive 16-inch guns that will soon speak. From due west, the heavy cruiser HMS Dorsetshire closes the distance. From due east, the formidable HMS Norfolk. And overhead, the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal, having delivered the crippling blow, waits for daylight to launch her final sorties. It's a convergence of steel and fire, a closing net from which there is no escape. The British sailors are just as exhausted, pushed to the limits of human endurance by the long, arduous chase. But they are driven by a singular purpose: to avenge the sinking of the HMS Hood. The loss of the Hood was a blow to the heart of the Royal Navy, and every man, from Admiral Tovey down to the youngest sailor, feels its weight. This isn't just a battle, it's personal. As the first hint of gray light begins to stain the eastern horizon, the sea calms slightly. The gale has blown itself out, as if even the weather is holding its breath for the final act. On the Bismarck, the watch changes. Men climb to their battle stations, their faces pale in the pre-dawn light. They can see the silhouettes now, smudges on the horizon that grow larger with each passing minute. The hunters have arrived. The radio on the Bismarck transmits its final message, a testament to their defiance. "Ship on manoeuvrable. We will fight to the last shell. Long live the Fouver for the men on board." It is a declaration of their final duty. They have been at sea for just 9 days. 9 days that shook the foundations of naval warfare. 9 days that will end here, in the cold waters of the Atlantic. The sun rises on May 27th, revealing a scene of tragic, epic finality. The crippled Bismarck, her flag still flying, is surrounded. The hounds have cornered the lion. The greatest chase in naval history is over. The final battle is about to begin. The world holds its breath as the first salvos are fired, and the story of the mighty Bismarck reaches its thunderous, inevitable conclusion. Dawn broke on May 27, 1941, over a churning, gray Atlantic. For the men aboard the German battleship Bismarck, it was to be their last sunrise. After a dramatic and relentless chase across thousands of miles of ocean, the Royal Navy had finally cornered its prey, the pride of the Kriegsmarine, crippled by a single torpedo from a Swordfish biplane the night before, now wallowed in the heavy seas, its rudder jammed, steering in helpless circles. The hunters were closing in. On the horizon, 2 colossal silhouettes emerged from the morning mist. His Majesty's ships, the King George V and the Rodney. These were not cruisers or destroyers. These were titans of the sea. Battleships built for one purpose: to obliterate their opposite numbers. Rodney, a veteran of an older class, carried 9 massive 16-inch guns. King George Huber, the flagship of the home fleet, brandished 10 14-inch guns. Together, they represented an overwhelming concentration of firepower, and it was all aimed at one target. Aboard Bismarck, the mood was grim but resolute. Captain Ernst Lindemann and his crew knew there was no escape. Their orders were clear: fight to the last shell. They had drawn first blood days earlier, sinking the mighty HMS Hood in a stunning display of gunnery. Now, retribution was at hand. Despite the hopeless situation, a steely determination filled the German warship. The gun crews stood ready at their stations, from the massive main turret Santon, Bruno, Caesar, and Dorito, the smaller secondary batteries. They would sell their lives dearly. At 8:47 a.m., the British opened fire. Rodney's 16-inch guns roared, sending half-ton shells screaming across the waves. Moments later, King George V joined the deadly chorus. The first salvos bracketed Bismarck, sending colossal plumes of water hundreds of feet into the air, drenching the German ship. The British gunners were finding their range with terrifying speed. Soon, the hits began to register. An early shell struck near Bismarck's forward superstructure, shattering the main fire control director. This was a devastating blow, effectively blinding the ship's primary guns. From that moment on, each of Bismarck's turrets would have to aim and fire independently, a far less accurate method. Despite the damage, Bismarck's guns fired back. Its first salvos were surprisingly close, a testament to the skill of the German gunners, even under impossible conditions. But they were firing blind against two fully functional opponents. The British shells started to tear Bismarck apart, piece by piece. One by one, the mighty turrets were silenced. A direct hit on turret Anton caused a massive explosion, its armored roof blown clean off. Then Bruno was hit, its barrels jammed into the air at a useless angle. The return fire from the German behemoth began to slacken. On the decks of the British ships, the sight was both awesome and terrible. Bismarck was being systematically dismantled. Shells from Rodney and King George V punched through its thick armor, igniting fires that belched thick, black smoke into the sky. Explosions rocked the vessel continuously. The superstructure was transformed into a twisted, burning scrapyard. Masts collapsed, guns were torn from their mountings, and a raging inferno consumed the midship section. Yet, incredibly, the ship's battle flag still flew. Below decks, the scene was hellish. Fires spread through corridors, and compartments filled with smoke and toxic fumes. The wounded were overwhelming the medical stations. Yet, the crew fought on. Engineers struggled to keep the power running. Ammunition handlers passed shells up to the few remaining guns, and damage control parties fought a losing battle against the flames and flooding. Their bravery was extraordinary, a final, defiant act in the face of certain death. They were following their orders, fulfilling what they saw as their duty to the very end. By 9:31 a.m., just over 40 minutes into the battle, all of Bismarck's main guns were out of action. Turrets Caesar and Dora, the aft guns, had been knocked out by catastrophic hits that caused internal explosions. The ship was a burning, silent hulk, its offensive capability completely erased. It was still afloat, but it was no longer a threat. The British battleships, having exhausted Bismarck's ability to fight back, closed the range to point blank, pouring shell after shell into the crippled vessel. They were determined to sink it with gunfire. A final, brutal punctuation mark on the hunt. The heavy cruisers HMS Norfolk and HMS Dorsetshire joined the fray, adding their 8-inch guns to the relentless bombardment. Hundreds of shells struck Bismarck. Its armor, once thought to be impenetrable, was shattered. Its deck was a scene of utter devastation. Still, the ship refused to sink. Its brilliant design and robust construction meant it could absorb an incredible amount of punishment. But its time was running out. With Bismarck clearly doomed and their own fuel levels running low, the British battleships eventually turned for home. It was left to the cruiser Dorsetshire to administer the final blow. Closing in on the wreck, Dorsetshire fired 2 torpedoes into Bismarck's starboard side. It then circled around and fired another into the port side. At the same time, surviving German crew members below decks were carrying out their final orders. To scuttle the ship. Explosive charges were set in the engine rooms and other critical compartments to hasten the inevitable. The end came quickly. The great ship began to list heavily to port. Water poured in through the countless shell holes and the gashes from the torpedoes. The fires still raged on its upper decks. Men who were still able jumped into the cold, unforgiving waters of the Atlantic. At 10:39 a.m., the Bismarck, the terror of the Atlantic and the pride of the German Navy, rolled over onto its side. Its stern rose high into the air, revealing the massive propellers and rudders. For a moment, it hung there, a final, dramatic silhouette against the gray sky. Then, with a groan of tortured steel, it slid backwards beneath the waves, gone forever. The battle was over. Of the more than 2,200 men who had sailed on the Bismarck, only just over 100 would be rescued from the icy water. The sinking of the Bismarck was a major turning point in the war at sea. It marked the end of an era, a demonstration that even the most powerful battleship could be brought down by a coordinated effort of naval and air power. The last stand of the Bismarck remains one of history as the most dramatic and brutal naval engagements, a story of technological might, relentless pursuit, and incredible, tragic bravery against impossible odds. The news arrived like a thunderclap, tearing through the Berghoff's serene atmosphere. The Bismarck, the pride of the Kriegsmarine, the unsinkable behemoth, was gone. It had been sunk. For Adolf Hitler, this wasn't just a military loss. It was a profound, personal wound, a public humiliation that struck at the very core of his prestige. The initial report was met with disbelief. How could it be? The Bismarck was more than a ship. It was a symbol of German engineering, power, and defiance. It was supposed to be invincible, a floating fortress that would dominate the Atlantic and bring Britain to its knees. Hitler had poured immense resources and faith into its creation. He had personally overseen its progress, marveling at its sheer scale and firepower. He had believed in the myth he helped create. But the facts were undeniable. The Royal Navy, stung and vengeful after the sinking of the Hood, had hunted the Bismarck with relentless fury. A lucky torpedo from a biplane, an obsolete-looking Swordfish, had jammed its rudder, sealing its fate. The mighty battleship, unable to steer, was a sitting duck. As the reality of the disaster sank in, Hitler's disbelief curdled into a volcanic rage. The scene at the Berghoff was one of terrifying fury. He paced the great hall like a caged animal, his face a mask of contorted anger. Papers were swept from desks, sent flying across the room in a blizzard of frustration. His voice, rising to a hysterical shriek, echoed through the mountain retreat. He cursed the Kriegsmarine, its commanders, its admirals. He called them incompetent, cowards, failures who had allowed his greatest prize to be snatched away. He screamed that Grand Admiral Rudder had misled him, that the entire Naval High Command had failed him. Why was it sent out alone? Why wasn't it better protected? The questions were accusations, fired off like shells. In his mind, this wasn't just a tactical error, it was a betrayal. The Navy, which he had so painstakingly rebuilt from the ashes of World War I, had disgraced itself, and, by extension, had disgraced him. The loss of the Bismarck became an obsession. It gnawed at him, fueling a growing paranoia that would poison his relationship with the surface fleet for the rest of the war. He saw incompetence and treachery everywhere. The humiliation was immense. The British propaganda machine was already working overtime, celebrating the victory and mocking the unsinkable German warship. The world was laughing at him. This psychological blow was devastating. Hitler's confidence in his surface fleet was shattered. He had envisioned a fleet of powerful battleships, like the Bismarck and its sister ship, the Tirpitz, projecting German power across the globe. Now, that dream lay at the bottom of the Atlantic. He saw the immense cost and resources, steel and manpower all wasted, all for nothing. The risk, he now believed, was too great. From this moment on, Hitler's naval strategy would undergo a dramatic shift. He became increasingly risk-averse, hesitant to commit his remaining capital ships to any major offensive operations. The Tirpitz, for instance, would spend most of the war hiding in Norwegian fjords. A fleet in being that posed a threat, but was never truly unleashed. He feared losing another major warship, another symbol of German prestige. The psychological scar left by the Bismarck was too deep. Instead, his focus turned decisively towards the wolf packs, under the command of Karl Dönitz, were proving far more effective and cost-efficient in strangling Britain's supply lines. They operated in the shadows, striking without warning and disappearing beneath the waves. They didn't offer the same grand spectacle as a mighty battleship, but they delivered results. Hitler, ever the pragmatist, when his ego wasn't directly challenged, recognized this. The U-boat arm of the Kriegsmarine would now receive top priority, while the Grand Surface Fleet was relegated to a secondary, almost symbolic, role. The sinking of the Bismarck was more than the loss of a ship. It was the death of a dream. It marked a turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic and in Hitler's own strategic thinking. The fury that erupted at the Berghof wasn't just about a lost vessel. It was the rage of a leader whose belief in his own myth-making had been brutally shattered by the cold, harsh reality of war at sea. The echoes of that fury would shape Germany's naval destiny until the very end. The great ships would rust in their ports, monuments to a failed strategy and a leader's broken confidence. The story of the German surface fleet in World War II is a tragic drama, filled with ambition, brief moments of glory, and ultimately, utter failure. It's a tale that ends not with a thunderous final battle, but with a quiet, bitter demise, ordered by the very leader who once dreamed of it, ruling the waves. This is the story of how the Kriegsmarine died, not in a blaze of gunfire, but locked away in port, rusting and forgotten. Our story begins in the bleak, icy waters of the Barents Sea. On the last day of 1942, a German naval force, led by the heavy cruiser Admiral Hipper and the pocket battleship was sent to intercept and destroy Allied convoy JW-51B, a critical supply line to the Soviet Union. The German commander, Admiral Oskar Kummetz, had clear orders: engage, destroy, and above all, avoid excessive risk. But the British escort, though outgunned, was tenacious. The Royal Navy destroyers, led by Captain Robert Sherbrooke, put up a ferocious defense, weaving between the convoy and the powerful German warships, laying smokescreens and launching daring torpedo attacks. The German ships, with their superior firepower, should have annihilated the convoy, but Kummetz was haunted by Hitler's standing order to avoid damage at all costs. He was cautious, hesitant. In the chaos of the Arctic twilight, the German gunnery was poor, and they mistook their own destroyers for the enemy. Just as the Hipper was closing in for the kill, British light cruisers Sheffield and Jamaica arrived, their radar-guided guns catching the Germans completely by surprise. The Admiral Hipper was hit, its speed reduced. Faced with a suddenly strengthened enemy and fearing for his ships, Kummetz broke off the attack and retreated. From a military perspective, the Battle of the Barents Sea was a minor skirmish. The convoy was saved, but the losses were minimal on both sides. But for Adolf Hitler, it was the final, unforgivable humiliation. When he received the news, he flew into one of his infamous rages. For years, he had poured vast resources into building these magnificent, powerful battleships. The Bismarck, the Tirpitz, they were symbols of German power, a fleet meant to challenge the might of the Royal Navy. And what had they achieved? The Bismarck was sunk, the Graf Spee scuttled, and now, his cruisers couldn't even sink a handful of freighters guarded by a few destroyers. He saw them as nothing but a waste of steel, manpower, and money. They were, in his words, useless. In his fury, Hitler summoned the head of the Kriegsmarine, Grand Admiral Erich Raeder, to his Wolf's Lair headquarters. The meeting was a disaster. Hitler screamed that the Navy was cowardly, that the spirit of the old imperial fleet was dead. He declared that the age of the surface ship was over. He made a snappy, irreversible decision. The entire German surface fleet, all the remaining battleships, pocket battleships, and cruisers were to be decommissioned. Their guns would be stripped and used for coastal defenses, and their crews would be sent to fight on the Eastern Front. The dream of a German high seas fleet was officially dead. Raeder was horrified. He had dedicated his life to rebuilding the German Navy after the Treaty of Versailles. He argued. He pleaded. He tried to explain the strategic value of the fleet, how even just their existence in Norwegian ports of the fleet and being tied down immense British naval and air resources that could otherwise be used elsewhere. The Tirpitz, Scharnhorst, and Gneisenau, lurking in the fjords, were a constant threat to the Arctic convoys, forcing the Royal Navy to deploy its own battleships as escorts. Decommissioning them would be a gift to the enemy, but Hitler would not listen. His mind was made up. He saw only the failure, the cowardice, the lack of results. For him, the ships were like expensive, unreliable toys that had broken one too many times. He was done with them, utterly defeated and seeing his life's work being dismantled. Grand Admiral Rudder had no choice but to offer his resignation. Hitler accepted it immediately. Rudder's replacement was Karl Dönitz, the mastermind of Germany's U-boat campaign. Dönitz was a pragmatist and a true believer in submarine warfare. He shared some of Hitler's skepticism about the big ships, but he also understood their strategic value better than the Führer did. In a series of cunning and careful arguments, Dönitz managed to persuade Hitler to partially reverse his decree. He argued that a sudden, complete decommissioning would be a massive propaganda victory for the Allies. It would be an open admission of defeat at sea. He proposed a compromise. He would scrap the older, less effective cruisers. But the real capital ships, the Scharnhorst, Gneisenau, and Tirpitz would remain active. However, their role would be strictly limited. They would only be used in actions where success was virtually guaranteed. There would be no more risky sorties, no more duels with the Royal Navy. They would essentially become a fortress fleet, a defensive weapon to be used only under the most favorable conditions. Hitler, placated by Dönitz's logic and his focus on the U-boat arm, agreed. The surface fleet was saved from the scrapyard, but it was a hollow victory. The soul of the Kriegsmarine was crushed. News of Hitler's order and Rudder's resignation spread like a virus through the fleet. For the sailors and officers aboard the Tirpitz, the Scharnhorst, and the Lutzow, the message was clear. They were no longer trusted. The leadership had lost faith in them and their ships. The aggressive, risk-taking spirit that had defined a naval warrior was now a liability. Their purpose was gone. Morale plummeted. Crews who had once trained relentlessly for a decisive battle against a British dreadnought now faced the demoralizing reality of inaction. They were confined to the desolate, windswept fjords of Norway, feeling more like prisoners than sailors. Their days were filled with endless, monotonous drills, painting the ship and waiting for orders that rarely came. They saw the U-boat crews celebrated as heroes, while they were seen as a costly, embarrassing failure. The pride they once felt in their magnificent ships curdled into a sense of futility and shame. This strategic shift had profound consequences for the rest of the war. With the surface fleet effectively neutered, Hitler doubled down on the two areas he believed held the key to victory: Dönitz S-boat, wolf-packs in the Atlantic, and the land war against the Soviet Union. Resources that might have gone to the Navy were poured into the Wehrmacht and the Waffen-SS, feeding the meat grinder of the Eastern Front. The story of the German surface fleet from this point on is one of slow, inevitable decline. The Gneisenau was badly damaged in a bombing raid and never repaired. The Scharnhorst made one final, desperate sortie against an Arctic convoy on Boxing Day 1943 and was hunted down and sunk by the battleship HMS Duke of York in the Battle of the North Cape, and the Lonely Queen of the North, the mighty Tirpitz, was finally destroyed in her Norwegian anchorage in November 1944 by British Lancaster bombers armed with massive tallboy bombs. The death of the German surface fleet was a self-inflicted wound, born from a dictator's rage and a profound misunderstanding of naval strategy. It was a strategic blunder that freed up the Royal Navy to dominate the seas, secure the vital supply lines, and project its power across the globe, contributing significantly to the final Allied victory. The great grey ships, once the pride of the Third Reich, ended their days not in a glorious Wagnerian finale, but as silent rusting monuments to a failed dream. The sinking of the Bismarck wasn't just the end of a ship, it was the dawn of a new chapter in the Second World War. On May 27th, as the pride of the Kriegsmarine slipped beneath the waves, the Royal Navy reasserted its centuries-old dominance over the seas. It was a brutal, costly victory, but its impact rippled far beyond the cold waters of the North Atlantic. For a Britain standing alone against the might of the Axis powers, this was more than just a naval success. It was a colossal morale boost, a symbol of defiance broadcast across the globe. The message was clear. Britain would not be broken. The story of the hunt for the Bismarck, with its dramatic twists and turns, captured the world's imagination. From the shocking loss of HMS Hood to the desperate last-ditch torpedo run by Swordfish biplanes, it was a saga of vengeance and determination. When the news finally broke that the Bismarck was sunk, a wave of relief and triumph swept through the Allied nations. It was a tangible victory at a time when victories were desperately scarce. It proved that even the most formidable weapon in Hitler's arsenal could be brought down. Strategically, the consequences were immense. The loss of his super battleship was a bitter pill for Hitler to swallow. He had pinned his hopes on these powerful surface raiders to sever Britain's lifeline. The transatlantic supply convoys, with Bismarck gone, and her sister ship Tirpitz forever shadowed by the threat of the Royal Navy and air power. Hitler's confidence in his surface fleet was shattered. He grew increasingly cautious, hesitant to risk his remaining capital ships in the open ocean. This strategic shift was a game-changer. The threat of German surface raiders diminished significantly, allowing the Royal Navy to focus more resources on the ever-present U-boat menace. The Atlantic supply lines, though still perilous, remained open. Food, fuel, and vital war materials continued to flow into Britain, keeping the island nation in the fight. This was absolutely crucial. Without those supplies, Britain's ability to wage war would have withered away. The sinking of the Bismarck ensured that the lifeline, however frayed, would not be cut. Imagine for a moment if Bismarck had succeeded. If she had broken out into the Atlantic and run rampant among the convoys, the damage would have been catastrophic. It could have starved Britain into submission before the United States even entered the war. The entire course of history would have been different, but the Royal Navy, through a combination of sheer grit, technological luck, and immense sacrifice, made sure that didn't happen. The crippled rudder, struck by a single torpedo from an obsolete biplane, was perhaps the most pivotal single point of failure in the entire war at sea. The hunt for the Bismarck effectively ended the era of the battleship as the undisputed queen of the seas. It highlighted the growing importance of air power, as it was carrier-launched aircraft that ultimately doomed the mighty vessel. The Swordfish biplanes, affectionately known as stringbags, looked like relics from another time. Yet, they delivered the decisive blow. This lesson was not lost on naval commanders around the world. The future of naval warfare, it was now clear, would be dominated by the aircraft carrier. Furthermore, the operation demonstrated the critical role of intelligence and technology. The cracking of Enigma codes, the use of radar, and the coordination of a vast fleet of ships and aircraft were all essential components of the victory. It was a modern, complex operation that showcased the new face of naval conflict. The days of two battle lines sailing towards each other for a decisive gun duel were fading into history. Hitler's reaction was telling. He increasingly turned his attention eastward, towards the planned invasion of the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa. He redirected resources and strategic focus away from the war at sea, believing the U-boat campaign would be sufficient. While the U-boats would indeed bring the Allies to the brink in the Battle of the Atlantic, the absence of a powerful surface fleet to support them was a direct result of the Bismarck's demise. The psychological impact on the Kriegsmarine was just as profound. The crews of the remaining German capital ships, like Scharnhorst, Gneisenau, and Tirpitz, knew that if they ventured out, the full weight of the Royal Navy would be brought down upon them. They became a fleet in being, a threat that tied down significant Allied resources but rarely posed a direct danger. Tirpitz spent most of her career hiding in Norwegian fjords, a constant target for British air raids, until she was finally sunk in 1944 without ever firing her main guns in anger at an enemy ship. This containment of the German surface fleet was one of the greatest strategic victories for the Allies. It allowed them to project power elsewhere and to build up the forces necessary for the eventual liberation of Europe. The open sea lanes not only supplied Britain but also enabled a massive buildup of American troops and equipment in the UK. Ahead of the D-Day landings, none of this would have been possible if ships like the Bismarck were still prowling the Atlantic. So, when we look back at the hunt for the Bismarck, we see more than just a thrilling naval chase. We see a pivotal moment that reshaped grand strategy. It was a victory that bolstered Allied morale when it was at its lowest ebb, that secured the vital Atlantic lifeline, and that forced a fundamental shift in German naval policy. It demonstrated the ascendancy of air power and the complex, technology-driven nature of modern warfare. The destruction of one single ship had a domino effect, influencing Hitler's military priorities and ensuring Britain could fight on until the industrial might of the United States could be brought to bear. It's a story of courage, of revenge, and of how a few brave men in obsolete planes could change the course of a world war. The legend of the Bismarck is not just about the sinking of a great battleship. It's about the moment the tide began to turn in the Battle of the Atlantic, a turn that would ultimately lead to Allied victory. The names of the ships involved: Hood, Prince of Wales, Ark Royal, King George V, Rodney, and of course, Bismarck are etched into the annals of naval history. Their epic confrontation remains one of the most studied and recounted naval events ever, a timeless testament to the drama and significance of the war at sea. The echoes of those thunderous broadsides in the Denmark Strait and the final, brutal onslaught in the Atlantic still resonate today, reminding us how the fate of nations can hang on the outcome of a single, desperate battle.